Picture this. You're sitting at your desk on the most important day in your company's history, watching a $12 million acquisition about to close, when your manager calls you into his office and fires you. You walk out thinking your career is over, but what he doesn't know is that in exactly 17 hours, when he tries to log into the systems to impress the new owners, every single server is going to lock him out completely. And the only person who can fix it? The woman he just escorted to the parking lot. That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago. And let me tell you, watching a grown man realize he just destroyed a multi-million-dollar deal because he fired the wrong person, that was better than any revenge movie you've ever seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and up until March 15th of this year, I thought I understood how corporate loyalty worked. You show up every day, you do excellent work, you solve problems nobody else can solve, and in return, you get job security and respect. I was 32 years old and had been living by that philosophy for my entire career. 6 years at DataStream Analytics in Denver had taught me that being indispensable was the best insurance policy you could have. DataStream wasn't some Silicon Valley giant or Fortune 500 corporation. We were a mid-sized business intelligence firm tucked into a converted warehouse in the Rhino district, the kind of place where you could still park for free and grab lunch from food trucks. We specialized in turning raw data into actionable insights for companies that couldn't afford their own analytics departments. Our clients ranged from regional healthcare networks to growing e-commerce businesses, and somehow, we'd built a reputation for delivering results that bigger consulting firms couldn't match. I was the senior systems administrator, which in a company our size meant I was essentially the keeper of everything digital. Every server, every database, every line of code that made DataStream function properly ran through systems I had designed, implemented, and maintained. When I started there fresh out of college, the company was running on a patchwork of outdated hardware and software that crashed more often than it worked. Over 6 years, I had rebuilt everything from the ground up. The transformation hadn't been easy. I remember those first months when I was pulling 16-hour days, learning on the fly, making mistakes that kept me awake at night. But gradually, piece by piece, I constructed something I was genuinely proud of. Our cloud infrastructure could scale automatically based on client demands. Our backup systems had redundancies for the redundancies. Our security protocols were so robust that we'd never lost a single byte of client data, even during the attempted breach last year that had sent half of Denver's tech companies into panic mode. My colleagues had started calling me the Keeper somewhere around year 3, and the nickname stuck. Nothing happened in our digital ecosystem without my knowledge. Every password, every access key, every security certificate was either generated by me or approved by me. It wasn't that I was a control freak, it was that I understood the consequences of letting critical systems run unsupervised. I'd seen too many companies lose everything because they trusted the wrong person, with the wrong level of access at the wrong time. The work was demanding, but I loved it. There's something deeply satisfying about solving complex technical problems that other people can't figure out. When a client's data integration was failing and their entire quarterly report was at risk, they called me. When our sales team needed a custom dashboard to close a major deal, I built it. When the CEO wanted to know if we could handle processing 50 times our normal data volume, I ran the tests and gave him definitive answers. I wasn't just maintaining systems, I was constantly improving them. While other system administrators were content to keep things running, I was always looking 3 steps ahead. What would happen if we doubled our client base? What if there was a natural disaster? What if someone tried to hack us? Every scenario had a contingency plan, and every contingency plan had been tested. My personal life had taken some hits along the way, The long hours and constant on-call availability meant that dating was complicated and friendships required patience. But I told myself it was worth it. I was building something important, contributing to a company that was growing and succeeding, partly because of my work. My salary was competitive, my benefits were solid, and I had the kind of job security that let me sleep well at night. Or at least, that's what I thought until Brad Mitchell walked into our lives. Brad arrived 8 months ago as our new operations manager, hired by our founder Robert Kane to help streamline our processes as we prepared for potential expansion. On paper, Brad looked perfect. He had an MBA from a respected program, 15 years of experience in operational efficiency, and a track record of helping companies prepare for major transitions. He was tall, confident, and had the kind of polished presentation skills that impressed clients and investors. From day one, something felt off about Brad's approach to our technology infrastructure. During his first week, he scheduled individual meetings with everyone in the IT department, which consisted of me and Lisa Chen, our talented junior developer. His questions were oddly specific for someone whose background was in operations rather than technology. He wanted to know about our disaster recovery procedures, our access control systems, and our documentation practices. At first, I assumed he was just being thorough. New managers often want to understand all aspects of the business, even areas outside their direct expertise. I spent hours walking him through our systems, explaining the logic behind our architecture decisions, and showing him the monitoring tools we use to track performance and security. But his follow-up questions revealed a troubling pattern. He wasn't asking about efficiency or cost optimization, which would have been appropriate for an operations manager. Instead, he seemed fixated on understanding who had access to what, how decisions were made about system changes, and what would happen if key personnel were unavailable. When I submitted my annual budget request for infrastructure upgrades, Brad's response was swift and dismissive. The security enhancements I'd proposed were unnecessarily complex. The backup system improvements were overkill for a company our size. The additional monitoring tools were nice to have, but not essential. Every recommendation I made was met with pushback that felt personal rather than professional. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The most unsettling part was how he started undermining my authority in small but noticeable ways. In meetings with other department heads, he would interrupt my technical explanations to offer simplified summaries that often missed crucial details. When clients asked technical questions during presentations, he would field them himself, and then look to me for confirmation, reversing the normal dynamic where I would provide expertise and he would facilitate. Lisa noticed it too. She started coming to me privately with concerns about conversations she'd had with Brad. He had asked her to document certain system procedures in detail, claiming it was for business continuity purposes. He wanted to know about any personal access codes or shortcuts I used that weren't part of the official documentation. Most troubling, he had suggested that our department might benefit from having multiple people who could handle Emma's responsibilities. I should have seen the warning signs more clearly, but I was genuinely busy with legitimate work. Our client base had grown significantly over the past year, and I was managing 3 major system integration projects simultaneously. DataStream had landed contracts with a regional hospital network, a growing logistics company, and a fintech startup that was processing millions of transactions monthly. Each client had unique requirements that pushed our infrastructure in different directions. The hospital network needed real-time data processing with absolute reliability because patient care decisions depended on our analytics. The logistics company required integration with dozens of different shipping and tracking systems, each with its own data format and update schedule. The fintech startup needed bank-level security protocols and the ability to scale processing power dynamically based on market activity. Juggling these demands while dealing with Brad's constant questioning and micromanagement was exhausting. I found myself working longer hours, not because the technical challenges were insurmountable, but because I had to document and justify every decision to someone who didn't have the background to understand the complexities involved. My brother Michael started commenting on how stressed I looked during our weekly family dinners. Michael was 3 years older than me and worked as a cybersecurity attorney for a firm that specialized in corporate data protection. He understood the technical aspects of my work better than most people, and he had developed good instincts about when companies were heading for trouble. "Emma, the way you're describing this guy's questions, it sounds like he's either planning to outsource your department or replace you," Michael told me one Sunday evening as we sat on his back patio watching his kids play in the yard. Corporate operations managers don't usually drill down into technical access controls unless they're preparing for a major change. I dismissed his concerns at the time. DataStream wasn't some faceless corporation where employees were disposable resources. Robert Kane had built the company from nothing, and he understood that our success depended on retaining talented people who understood both the technology and the clients. I had a track record of solving problems and delivering results. Surely, that counted for something. Besides, I was in the middle of preparing for the biggest opportunity in DataStream's history. For months, Robert had been in negotiations with Technova Corporation, a rapidly growing technology company based in Austin that was looking to expand their data analytics capabilities through strategic acquisitions. Technova had revenues in the hundreds of millions and clients that included several Fortune 500 companies. Being acquired by them would transform DataStream from a regional player into part of a national operation. The due diligence process had been intense. Technova's technical team had spent weeks reviewing our infrastructure, our client contracts, and our operational procedures. They were particularly impressed with the scalability and security of our systems, which they saw as valuable assets that could be leveraged across their broader client base. I had played a central role in those discussions, walking Technova's engineers through our architecture, explaining our monitoring and maintenance procedures, and demonstrating how we had achieved near-perfect uptime even as our client base had tripled. Their technical lead had called our setup impressively sophisticated for a company your size, and had specifically mentioned that our security protocols exceeded what they saw at much larger firms. The acquisition was structured as a $12 million deal, with DataStream becoming a wholly owned subsidiary of Technova while maintaining operational independence. For a company that Robert had started in his garage 7 years earlier, it was a life-changing outcome. For employees like me, it meant joining a much larger organization with more resources, better benefits, and significantly more opportunities for career advancement. As we moved toward the closing date, I threw myself into preparation work with the kind of intensity that had characterized my entire career at DataStream. I created detailed documentation for every system, developed migration plans for integrating our infrastructure with Technova's existing platforms, and prepared contingency procedures for any issues that might arise during the transition. The technical integration was complex but manageable. Technova used different monitoring tools and had more stringent security requirements, but our systems were flexible enough to accommodate their standards. I spent several weeks working directly with their IT team to ensure that the transition would be seamless from a client perspective. What I didn't realize was that Brad had been using this period to position himself as the key operational contact for the acquisition. While I was focused on technical details, he was building relationships with Technova's management team and presenting himself as the person who understood DataStream's operations better than anyone else. The closing was scheduled for Friday, March 15th. Technova's lawyers and executives would be flying in from Austin to finalize the paperwork and begin the integration process. It was supposed to be a celebration, the culmination of months of hard work and negotiation that would secure everyone's future and take DataStream to the next level. I had taken Thursday night off for the first time in weeks, planning to get A good night's sleep before what I expected would be a long but exciting day. I remember feeling genuinely optimistic about the future. The acquisition would validate all the work I'd put into building DataStream's technical foundation, and joining Technova would give me access to resources and challenges that could take my career in directions I'd never imagined. Friday morning, I arrived at the office early to run final system checks and make sure everything was running perfectly for the Technova team's arrival. Our servers were humming along smoothly, all backup systems were operational, and the network performance metrics looked excellent. I had prepared a presentation that would walk the new owners through our operational procedures and highlight the key strengths of our infrastructure. At 11 a.m., I saw the Technova executives arrive through the lobby windows. They looked professional and confident, the kind of people who made $12 million decisions with the same ease that most people chose lunch options. I felt a surge of pride knowing that they were about to officially become part of something I had helped build. Lisa was at her desk working on final documentation updates, and she looked up with a nervous smile when she saw me watching the lobby. "Big day," she said quietly. "Are you excited?" I nodded, still watching the Technova team as they were escorted toward the conference room where the signing would take place. "It's going to be good for all of us," I told her. "Better resources, bigger challenges, more opportunities to grow." What I didn't know was that in 3 hours, Brad Mitchell would call me into that same conference room and destroy everything I thought I understood about loyalty, fairness, and job security. In 3 hours, I would learn that 6 years of excellent work and irreplaceable expertise meant nothing when someone in a position of authority decided you were inconvenient. But I also didn't know that Brad was about to make the biggest mistake of his professional life, one that would teach him exactly why you should never fire the person who designed and controlled every system you needed to do your job. The phone. Call came at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. I was running diagnostics on our primary database cluster when my desk phone rang with the internal extension tone that meant someone was calling from within the building. The caller ID showed Brad Mitchell's extension, which immediately put me on edge. In 8 months of working together, Brad had never once called me directly. He preferred email or face-to-face meetings where he could control the conversation flow and make sure other people witnessed whatever points he wanted to make. "Emma, could you come to conference room B when you have a moment?" His voice had that carefully neutral tone that managers use when they're about to deliver news they know you won't want to hear. "We need to discuss some operational changes that affect your department." Conference room B was the smaller of our 2 meeting spaces, tucked away at the end of the hallway where conversations couldn't be overheard by people walking past. It was where Robert held sensitive discussions about client issues or financial matters that required privacy. The fact that Brad was using it for whatever he wanted to discuss with me felt ominous in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I saved my work and locked my workstation, following the security protocols I'd drilled into myself over years of handling sensitive client data. As I walked down the hallway toward the conference room, I passed the lobby where I could see Technova executives, still engaged in animated conversation with Robert and our legal team. Papers were spread across the reception area's coffee table, and everyone looked focused but relaxed. The acquisition was clearly proceeding exactly as planned. Lisa looked up from her desk as I passed, raising her eyebrows in a silent question. I shrugged and kept walking, figuring that whatever Brad wanted to discuss would probably take 15 minutes at most. Maybe he had questions about the system integration timeline, or perhaps Technova had requested additional documentation that I needed to prepare quickly. When I opened the conference room door, I immediately knew something was seriously wrong. Brad was sitting at the far end of the table with a folder open in front of him, but he wasn't alone. Tom Martinez from Human Resources was sitting to his left, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. Near the door, almost like he was blocking my exit, stood Marcus Webb from Building Security. The sight of Marcus made my stomach drop. He was a nice enough guy who usually spent his shifts monitoring the parking garage and signing in visitors, but his presence in a meeting about operational changes could only mean one thing. Whatever Brad was planning to tell me, he expected me to react badly enough that security might be necessary. "Emma, please have a seat." Brad gestured toward the chair directly across from him, his expression professionally neutral in the way that people practice in management training courses. "Tom and I need to discuss some organizational restructuring that will be taking effect immediately." I remained standing, my hand still on the door handle. Every instinct I'd developed over 6 years of navigating corporate politics was screaming that I needed to be very careful about how I responded to whatever came next. "What kind of restructuring?" Tom cleared his throat and pulled out a document that looked like it had been printed from a template. "Emma, as you know, the acquisition by Teknova represents a significant change in how DataStream will be operating going forward. After careful consideration of our future staffing needs and organizational structure, we've made the decision to eliminate several positions that are no longer aligned with our strategic direction." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "You're firing me. We're restructuring the IT department to better align with Teknova's existing infrastructure," Brad said, taking over the conversation with the smooth confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Your role as Senior Systems Administrator is being eliminated as part of this transition. Teknova has their own technical teams who will be handling system integration and ongoing maintenance." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. "Brad, you can't be serious. The acquisition is happening because of the systems I built. Teknova specifically mentioned our infrastructure as one of the key assets they're acquiring. You're firing me on the day the deal closes?" "The decision has already been made," he replied, sliding a packet of papers across the table toward me. "Your employment with DataStream Analytics is terminated effective immediately. Tom will walk you through the severance package and exit procedures." The packet contained standard termination paperwork, a non-disclosure agreement, and a severance offer that was exactly what company policy required and nothing more. 2 weeks of pay, continuation of health insurance for 30 days, and a neutral reference letter that would confirm my employment dates and job title without providing any details about performance or contributions. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? I'm the only person who knows how half of our systems work. The integration with Teknova depends on having someone who understands our architecture." Brad's expression hardened. "Emma, I understand you're upset, but this decision is final. Teknova has assured us that they have the technical expertise to handle the transition. Your documentation and system specifications will provide everything they need." "My documentation?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Brad, you can't run complex IT infrastructure from documentation. These systems require hands-on management, ongoing optimization, and institutional knowledge that takes years to develop. You're about to hand Teknova a technical disaster." "That's enough." His voice took on an edge that I'd never heard before. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. The company is moving in a new direction, and your services are no longer required. I need you to sign these papers and coordinate with Marcus for the return of company property." Tom was shifting uncomfortably in his chair, clearly recognizing that this conversation was going worse than Brad had anticipated. "Emma, I know this is a shock, but the severance package is quite generous considering the circumstances. You'll have time to find new employment, and your experience here will certainly be valuable to other companies." "Other companies?" I turned to stare at him. "Tom, I built this place from nothing. I turned a failing infrastructure into something that impressed a multi-million-dollar corporation enough to acquire us. And you're talking about finding other companies like this? Is some routine downsizing?" Marcus stepped forward slightly, not quite moving to block the door, but making his presence more obvious. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to keep your voice down. There are important meetings happening in the building today." The reminder of what was happening elsewhere in the building hit me like a second shock. While I was being fired, Robert and the Technova executives were probably signing papers that would finalize the acquisition. The systems I had spent 6 years building were about to become Technova's property, but I wouldn't be there to ensure the transition went smoothly. "Does Robert know about this?" I asked Brad directly. "Does he know you're firing his senior systems administrator on acquisition day?" "Robert is focused on the strategic aspects of the acquisition," Brad replied smoothly. "Operational decisions like this are within my authority as operations manager. He trusts me to handle staffing transitions appropriately." The way he said it made me realize that Robert probably had no idea what was happening in this conference room. He was busy with lawyers and executives, celebrating the biggest deal in DataStream's history, while his operations manager was systematically destroying the technical foundation that had made the deal possible. I looked down at the termination papers again, trying to think through my options. I could refuse to sign and demand to speak with Robert, but that would likely just create a scene that would embarrass everyone and accomplish nothing. I could threaten legal action, but wrongful. Termination cases were difficult to win, especially when a company could claim they were restructuring due to an acquisition. The truth was that Colorado was an at-will employment state, which meant that companies could fire employees for almost any reason or no reason at all, as long as they weren't violating specific anti-discrimination laws. Being good at my job, or even being essential to company operations, didn't provide any legal protection against termination. "How long do I have to clear out my office?" I asked, accepting the reality of the situation even as my mind raced through the implications of what Brad was doing. "We'd prefer to handle this immediately," Marcus said, speaking for the first time since I'd entered the room. "I can escort you to your desk to collect personal items, and then we'll need you to surrender your building access card and any company devices." The logistics of firing someone in the technology field are more complicated than in most other jobs. I had administrative access to every system DataStream operated, from email servers to client databases to financial records. Standard security protocol required that access to be revoked immediately upon termination to prevent any possibility of sabotage or data theft. But Brad apparently didn't understand the difference between having access and being the person who designed and controlled the access systems themselves. He was thinking like someone who had only worked with enterprise software, where IT departments manage user accounts through centralized administration panels. He had no idea that our systems were built differently, with security layers and access controls that I had implemented specifically to prevent unauthorized changes. "I'll need my laptop and personal files," I said, standing up from the table. "And there are some personal items in my desk that I'd like to take with me." Marcus nodded and moved toward the door. "We can take care of that right now. I'll need you to pack quickly and avoid accessing any company systems while you're at your workstation." The walk from conference room B to my desk felt surreal. I could hear voices from the lobby where the acquisition celebration was presumably still in progress, but the hallways felt empty and echoing. Lisa looked up with concern as we approached, clearly startled by the sight of security escorting me to my own workspace. "Emma, what's going on?" she asked, standing up from her chair. "I've been terminated," I said simply, not wanting to create additional drama, but also not wanting to lie to someone who had become both a colleague and a friend. Brad eliminated my position as part of the acquisition restructuring. Lisa's face went pale. "They fired you? Today?" "But the Technova people specifically asked about system documentation this morning. They wanted to schedule technical briefings for next week." Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to focus on packing your personal items and avoid discussing company business." I opened my desk drawers and began collecting the accumulated personal items that somehow multiply over 6 years in the same workspace. Coffee mugs, phone chargers, a small succulent plant that had survived countless late-night debugging sessions, framed photos from family gatherings, and various tech conference swag that had seemed worth keeping at the time. My laptop was company property, but it contained 6 years of personal bookmarks, customized development environments, and tools that I had created for my own use. Separating personal and professional digital assets is nearly impossible when you've been doing complex, technical work for years, but company policy was clear that all devices and data belonged to DataStream. "I'll need to transfer some personal files," I told Marcus, opening the laptop to begin the process of identifying what I could legitimately claim as my own work. "No computer access," he replied firmly. "Company policy requires that terminated. Employees surrender all devices immediately without accessing them further." The irony was staggering. I was being prevented from accessing my own computer by security policies that I had helped develop to protect the company from potential threats. Marcus was following procedures that I had written to ensure that departing employees couldn't damage systems or steal sensitive information. "There are personal photos and documents on here," I protested. "Things that have nothing to do with company business. Those can be retrieved later through the HR process," Tom said, appearing at my shoulder with a cardboard box for my personal items. "We'll have someone review the laptop contents and return anything that's clearly personal in nature." I knew that later probably meant never, and that the HR process for returning personal files was bureaucratic enough that most people simply wrote off whatever they lost. But arguing further would only make the situation more uncomfortable for everyone involved, including Lisa, who was watching this unfold with obvious distress. As I packed my belongings, I couldn't help but notice the technical documentation scattered across my desk. System diagrams, network topology charts, security protocols, and integration plans for the Technova transition. Months of preparation work that represented hundreds of hours of analysis and planning. All of it would remain behind, presumably for Brad to hand over to whoever Technova assigned to manage the technical integration. The packing process took less than 10 minutes. 6 years of working in the same space, and everything that was truly mine fit into a single cardboard box. The rest of it, the computers and monitors and technical references and project files, belonged to DataStream and would presumably become Technova's property within a matter of hours. "I'll need your building access card and any company keys," Marcus said as I closed the box and picked it up from my desk. I pulled the key card from my wallet and handed it over, along with the physical keys to server rooms and storage areas that I rarely used anymore but still carried out of habit. Each item I surrendered felt like losing a piece of my professional identity, the tangible symbols of 6 years spent building something I was genuinely proud of. "What about system passwords and administrative access?" Lisa asked quietly. "Emma's the primary admin for almost everything we run." Marcus looked uncertain, clearly not equipped to handle technical questions that went beyond basic security procedures. "That's not my area. I assume IT will handle any necessary password changes." I almost smiled at the circular logic. I was IT, or at least the most critical part of it. The person they were asking to handle password changes was the same person they were escorting out of the building. But explaining that would require getting into technical details that Marcus wouldn't understand, and that would probably sound like I was threatening to cause problems. The elevator ride to the parking garage was conducted in silence. Marcus maintained professional courtesy, holding the elevator door and offering to carry my box. But there was an underlying tension that came from the strange situation we found ourselves in. He was clearly a decent person who didn't enjoy escorting terminated employees out of the building, especially when those employees had been well-regarded members of the team. "For what it's worth," he said as we reached my car, "I'm sorry this happened. You always seemed like one of the good ones." I thanked him and loaded my box into the trunk, then sat in the driver's seat for several minutes trying to process what had just occurred. Through the garage's glass walls, I could see the DataStream offices where people were presumably still working normally, unaware that their senior systems administrator had just been eliminated. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lisa. "I can't believe they did this to you. Call me later when you're ready to talk." Another message came in almost immediately, this one from Michael. "How did the big acquisition day go? Are you celebrating? Yet?" I stared at my brother's message, realizing that I had no idea how to explain what had just happened. This morning, I had been excited about a career-defining day that would secure my future and validate years of hard work. Now I was sitting in a parking garage with a box of personal items, officially unemployed for the first time since college. But as I started my car and began driving home, a different kind of thought began forming in the back of my mind. Brad had made a catastrophic error in judgment, one that would become apparent very quickly. He had fired the one person who understood how DataStream systems actually worked, on the same day that those systems needed to perform flawlessly for new owners who were evaluating their $12 million investment. What Brad didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand given his background, was that I hadn't just built DataStream's infrastructure. I had designed it with security principles that I'd learned from years of dealing with corporate data, breaches, and system failures. Every critical system required multi-factor authentication tied to physical security tokens that only I possessed. Every administrative function was logged and monitored through systems that I controlled. Every backup and recovery procedure depended on access credentials that lived in secure systems that I had configured personally. Brad thought he was firing an employee. What he had actually done was remove the one person who could ensure that DataStream systems would continue functioning properly under Technova's ownership. And tomorrow morning, when Technova's technical team tried to begin their integration work, they were going to discover exactly how much they didn't know about the systems they had just acquired. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown Denver, watching the city where I'd built my career pass by outside my windows. For the first time since walking into Conference Room B, I began to smile. The drive home passed in a strange haze of disconnected thoughts. I found myself taking familiar routes automatically while my mind struggled to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Traffic moved around me in its normal Friday afternoon pattern. People heading home from work or out for weekend plans, completely unaware that my entire professional world had just imploded in the space of 20 minutes. When I pulled into my driveway, the house felt different somehow. It was the same modest craftsman-style home in the Highlands neighborhood that I'd bought 3 years ago. But walking through the front door as an unemployed person rather than a senior systems administrator changed the entire atmosphere. Mortgage payment that had seemed manageable this morning suddenly felt like a looming threat. The career momentum I'd been building for 6 years had evaporated in a single conversation. I set the cardboard box on my kitchen counter and stared at it for several minutes, as if the collection of personal items might somehow explain what had just happened. The coffee mug with our company logo that I'd received during my first week at DataStream now felt like evidence from a different lifetime. The small succulent plant that had survived countless late nights in the office seemed absurdly optimistic sitting on my granite countertop. My phone rang, jarring me out of my contemplation. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and I realized he was probably calling to hear about how the acquisition celebration had gone. The irony of that timing was almost too much to bear. "Emma, how was the big day? Are you officially part of a major corporation now?" His voice was cheerful and excited, the way it always was when he thought good things were happening for his little sister. I opened my mouth to respond and found that I couldn't immediately form words. How do you explain to someone that you've just been fired on what was supposed to be the best day of your career? "Emma, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed. "Michael, something happened today. Something bad." The change in his tone was immediate. "What kind of bad? Are you hurt? Is there an emergency?" "I got fired." The words came out flat and emotionless, which somehow made them feel more real. Brad Mitchell terminated my employment this afternoon, right in the middle of the acquisition. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Michael was a lawyer, trained to process information quickly and ask the right questions, but I could hear him struggling to make sense of what I'd told him. Wait, they fired you today? On acquisition day? Emma, that makes no sense from any business perspective. You're the reason their systems are worth acquiring in the first place. Apparently not anymore. Brad says Technova has their own technical teams, and my position is being eliminated as part of organizational restructuring. That's... Michael paused, and I could almost hear him shifting into attorney mode. Emma, that's either the stupidest business decision I've ever heard of, or there's something else going on here. Companies don't fire critical technical personnel on the same day they're handing over assets to new owners. I walked to my living room window and looked out at the street where neighbors were coming home from their normal Friday jobs that still existed. He had security escort me out of the building, Michael. I wasn't allowed to access my computer or talk to anyone about transition procedures. They treated me like a security threat. Security escort? Now Michael sounded genuinely alarmed. Emma, what exactly did they say about why you were being terminated? Did they give any specific reasons or just the restructuring explanation? I recounted the conference room conversation as accurately as I could remember it, including Brad's insistence that Technova's documentation would be sufficient for system management and his dismissal of my warnings about the complexity of the infrastructure. Michael was quiet for a long time after I finished. When he finally spoke, his voice had taken on the careful, analytical tone he used when he was working through legal problems. Emma, I need to ask you some technical questions, and I want you to think carefully about your answers. When you built DataStream systems, what kind of access controls did you implement? Standard enterprise security protocols, multi-factor authentication, role-based permissions, administrative separation, audit logging. Why? Who has the master administrative access to your systems? I hesitated, suddenly understanding where his questions were leading. Technically, I do. I mean, there are other admin accounts, but mine is the primary with override capabilities. And when they terminated you today, did anyone ask for passwords, security tokens, or administrative credentials? Marcus asked for my building keycard and office keys, but nobody mentioned system access. I don't think Brad understands the difference between physical security and digital infrastructure. Michael was quiet again, but I could hear him typing in the background. Emma, you need to listen to me very carefully. Based on what you're telling me, DataStream is about to have a massive technical crisis, and it's going to happen very soon. What do you mean? If you're the primary systems administrator with override access, and they terminated you without proper credential transfer procedures, then Technova is going to discover tomorrow that they've acquired a company whose critical systems are essentially locked down. The full implications of what Michael was saying began to sink in. I had built DataStream's infrastructure with security as the primary concern, implementing multiple layers of protection that required specific credentials and physical tokens to access. Those tokens were sitting in my purse right now, along with the laptop that contained my personal certificates and access keys. Michael, they took my work laptop, but all my administrative access runs through personal security certificates that are stored on my personal devices, and the physical authentication tokens are on my keychain. Show me, he said immediately. I'm coming over right now. Don't touch anything. Don't log into any systems, and don't try to contact anyone at DataStream. We need to understand exactly what kind of situation they've created before we decide how to handle it. While I waited for Michael to arrive, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think through the technical architecture I had built over 6 years. The systems had evolved organically as DataStream grew, with each new client and security requirement, adding additional layers of complexity. What had started as a straightforward setup had become a sophisticated network that required deep institutional knowledge to manage effectively. The core infrastructure ran on a hybrid cloud architecture that I had designed to balance performance, security, and cost-effectiveness. Client data was processed through multiple servers that communicated with each other using encrypted protocols and rotated security keys. Administrative access required not just passwords, but also physical tokens that generated time-sensitive codes and biometric verification for the most sensitive operations. I had implemented these security measures after watching other companies in Denver suffer devastating data breaches that destroyed their reputations and client relationships. DataStream's clients trusted us with their most sensitive business information, and I had taken that responsibility seriously enough to build systems that exceeded industry standards for data protection. But those same security measures that had protected DataStream's clients were now going to protect the systems from Brad Mitchell and anyone else who tried to access them without proper authorization. The irony was almost poetic. The security protocols I had created to prevent unauthorized access were about to prevent the company's own management from accessing their own systems. Michael arrived 45 minutes later, carrying his laptop, bag and wearing the focused expression he got when he was working on complex legal problems. He hugged me briefly, then set up his computer on my dining room table and opened several windows that I recognized as legal databases and corporate research tools. Before we look at the technical side, I want to understand the legal implications of what happened today, he said, pulling out a legal pad and a pen. Walk me through the termination process again, but this time I want every detail you can remember about what was said and who was present. I described the conference room, meeting again, this time paying attention to the specific language that Brad and Tom had used. Michael took notes and asked clarifying questions about company policy, severance terms, and whether anyone had mentioned intellectual property or confidentiality concerns. The fact that they had security present suggests they were expecting you to react badly, he said when I finished. But the fact that they didn't ask about system access suggests they fundamentally misunderstood what your job actually involved. Brad's background is in operational efficiency, not technology. I don't think he realizes that systems administration isn't just about following procedures from a manual. Michael nodded and opened his laptop. Now show me exactly what kind of access you have to DataStream systems, and more importantly, what someone would need to do to replicate that access. I explained the multi-layered security architecture I had implemented, starting with the basic network access controls and working up through the database permissions, administrative interfaces, and backup systems. Michael listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that revealed his sophisticated understanding of cybersecurity law. Emma, based on what you're telling me, DataStream is going to face a choice sometime in the next few days. Either they ask you to help them with system access, or they risk having Technova discover that they've acquired a company whose technical infrastructure is essentially non-functional. What do you think I should do? Michael leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for several minutes. Legally, you have no obligation to provide assistance to a company that terminated your employment. Ethically, the situation is more complicated, especially if client data could be affected by system outages. But practically? Practically, you have more leverage than you realize. Technova paid $12 million for a company that included your technical infrastructure as a key asset. If that infrastructure becomes inaccessible because DataStream mishandled your termination, Technova is going to want answers and accountability. I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation as I considered what Michael was suggesting. Part of me wanted to help prevent the crisis that was coming, out of loyalty to clients and colleagues who didn't deserve to suffer because of Brad's poor judgment. But another part of me was curious to see how long it would take for the full scope of the problem to become apparent. What should I expect to happen next? Michael started packing up his laptop. If I'm right about the technical situation, you're going to get a phone call within the next 72 hours. It might be from Robert, it might be from Technova's technical team, or it might be from Brad himself once he realizes what he's done. And if they call, we'll deal with that when it happens. But Emma, You need to be prepared for the possibility that this situation could work out better for you than getting fired initially seems to suggest. After Michael left, I spent the evening in a strange state of suspended animation. I ordered takeout Chinese food and tried to watch Netflix, but I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. My mind kept cycling through scenarios of what might be happening at DataStream and Technova as people tried to understand the systems they now owned. I found myself wondering if Lisa was still at the office, trying to answer technical questions that were beyond her experience level. I thought about Robert, probably still celebrating the biggest deal of his career, unaware that his operations manager had created a potential disaster. Most of all, I wondered how long it would take for Brad to realize that his cost-saving decision to eliminate my position had potentially cost the company far more than my salary and benefits. Saturday morning brought an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time in 6 years, I woke up without immediately checking my phone for system alerts or overnight issues that needed attention. No servers were my responsibility anymore. No clients were depending on infrastructure that I maintained. No deadlines were waiting for my attention. But that freedom felt hollow when I remembered that it had come at the cost of everything I'd worked to build. I made coffee and sat on my back patio, trying to decide what to do with a weekend that wasn't interrupted by work responsibilities. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lisa. "Emma, something weird is happening with the servers this morning. Technova's people are asking questions I can't answer. I tried calling you earlier but wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from DataStream people right now." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "I'm not supposed to access company systems anymore, but if there's an emergency that affects client data, you can call me." Her response came back immediately. "It's not an emergency yet, but the Technova technical team is frustrated because they can't get administrative access to several critical systems. Brad told them that all the documentation they need is available, but they're saying the documentation doesn't match what they're seeing." The timeline was faster than I had expected. I had assumed it would take at least until Monday for integration work to begin, but apparently Technova was eager to start the technical assessment process immediately. And they were already discovering that understanding DataStream systems from documentation was very different from actually managing them. I texted back, "Be careful about what you promise them. Some of those systems require credentials and access tokens that might not be documented anywhere." That's what I was afraid of. "Emma, I don't think Brad understands what he's done." Looking at Lisa's message, I realized that Michael had been right about the leverage situation. DataStream and Technova were going to need my help, whether they admitted it immediately or not. And when they finally recognized that reality, I would be in a position to negotiate from strength rather than desperation. I spent the rest of Saturday researching my legal rights and options, reading through employment contracts and Colorado labor law. I also began documenting everything I could remember about the termination process, creating a timeline that might be useful if the situation escalated to legal action. Sunday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The area code was Austin, Texas, which made me think it might be someone from Technova. I let it go to voicemail and waited to see if they would leave a message. The voicemail was from someone named Jennifer Walsh, who identified herself as Technova's Director of Technical Integration. Her voice was professional but carried an undertone of frustration that suggested she was dealing with problems she hadn't expected. "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Jennifer Walsh from Technova Corporation. We're currently working on the technical integration for the DataStream acquisition, and we're encountering some challenges with system access that we'd like to discuss with you. Could you please call me back at your earliest convenience? My direct number is..." I played the message twice, paying attention to her tone and word choice. She had called me directly rather than going through DataStream management, which suggested that Technova was beginning to understand that the technical problems they were facing required my specific expertise. But I didn't call her back immediately. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to Michael and asked for his advice about how to handle contact from Technova's technical team. His response came back within an hour. Don't respond until tomorrow. Let them spend another day trying to solve this problem themselves. When you do talk to them, remember that you're not their employee and you have no obligation to provide free consulting services to fix DataStream's mistakes. Sunday evening, I received another text from Lisa. Emma, things are getting tense. Here. The Technova people spent all weekend trying to access systems, and they're scheduled to brief their executives tomorrow morning about integration readiness. I think they're realizing that the acquisition might be more complicated than they expected. I could imagine the conversations happening in Technova's Austin offices, as technical teams tried to explain to executives why they couldn't immediately begin integrating systems that had been specifically highlighted as acquisition assets. Someone was probably questioning whether DataStream's technical capabilities had been accurately represented during the due diligence process. And sometime very soon, someone was going to ask the obvious question: where was the person who had built these systems, and why wasn't she available to facilitate the transition? That's when Brad Mitchell was going to discover exactly how expensive it could be to fire the wrong person at the wrong time. Monday morning arrived with an urgency that I felt even before my alarm went off. I woke up naturally at 6 a.m., my internal clock still programmed for the early schedule that had defined my working life at DataStream. For a moment, lying in bed watching sunlight filter through my bedroom curtains, I almost reached for my phone to check for overnight system alerts before remembering that those systems were no longer my responsibility. The irony of that realization was perfect. Somewhere across town, people were probably dealing with the exact system issues I would normally handle, except now they had no way to resolve them effectively. I made coffee and settled at my kitchen table to wait for what I knew would be an interesting day. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang at 7:45 with a number I recognized as DataStream's main line. Instead of answering, I let it go to voicemail, curious to hear who was calling and how desperate they might sound. The message was from Tom Martinez in Human Resources, and his usual bureaucratic calm had been replaced by something approaching panic. Emma, this is Tom from DataStream. We need to speak with you urgently about some technical issues that have come up during the acquisition transition. Could you please call me back as soon as possible? We're willing to discuss bringing you back as a contractor to help with the integration process. The word contractor was interesting. It suggested they were already thinking about how to get my help without admitting they had made a mistake in firing me. But the timing of the call, less than 60 hours after escorting me out of the building, indicated that the technical problems were more severe than anyone had anticipated. Before I could decide how to respond to Tom's message, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Robert Kane's personal cell phone number. The fact that the company founder was calling me directly, rather than going through Brad or HR, suggested that the situation had escalated beyond normal operational channels. I answered on the fourth ring, keeping my voice professionally neutral. Good morning, Robert. Emma, thank God you picked up. His voice carried the strained quality of someone who hadn't slept well. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about your termination, and we need your help to resolve some technical issues with the Technova integration. A misunderstanding. I let the question hang in the air, curious to hear how he would characterize what Brad had done. Look, I'll be honest with you. I was so focused on the legal and financial aspects of the acquisition that I wasn't paying attention to operational decisions. Brad assured me that the technical transition would be seamless, but it turns out the situation is more complicated than he represented. Robert paused, and I could hear voices in the background that sounded frustrated and urgent. Emma, Technova's technical team has been trying since Saturday to access our core systems, and they're encountering security protocols that aren't documented anywhere. They're starting to question whether we accurately represented our technical capabilities during due diligence. "That's unfortunate," I said, maintaining the same neutral tone. "What kind of help are you looking for?" "We need you to come in today and walk their team through the system architecture, just for a few hours, to get them oriented and make sure the integration goes smoothly. We're prepared to pay consulting rates for your time." I found myself smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. Robert was a decent person who had always treated me fairly, but he was also trying to solve a crisis without acknowledging the fundamental problem that had created it. "Robert, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure a few hours of consulting is going to solve the issues Technova is facing." "What do you mean?" "The systems I built for DataStream aren't just complicated. They're specifically designed to prevent unauthorized access. The security protocols that are blocking Technova's team aren't bugs or oversights. They're features that protect client, data, and company assets from exactly the kind of unauthorized access attempts that are happening right now." There was a long silence on Robert's end. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a more serious tone. "Emma, are you saying that our systems are intentionally locked down against the new owners?" "I'm saying that your systems are working exactly as designed. They're protecting DataStream's assets from people who don't have proper administrative credentials, regardless of who those people are or what they think they're entitled to access. But Technova owns the company now. They should have access to everything." Ownership and access are two different things, Robert. Technova owns the legal rights to DataStream's assets, but that doesn't automatically grant them technical access to secure systems. That requires proper credential transfer and administrative handoffs, which didn't happen because I was terminated without any transition procedures. I could hear Robert breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "What would it take to resolve this situation?" "That depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you want me to provide emergency consulting to unlock systems for Technova, we can discuss hourly rates and project scope. If you want a permanent solution that ensures smooth ongoing operations, that's a different conversation entirely." "What kind of different conversation?" "The kind where you acknowledge that firing your senior systems administrator on acquisition day was a mistake that put both companies at risk, and we discuss terms for me to return in a role that actually makes sense given my responsibilities and expertise." Robert was quiet for almost a minute. I could hear muffled voices in the background, and I imagined him covering the phone while consulting with other people about how to handle my response. "Emma, can you give me until this afternoon to discuss options with the Technova team? We're all in meetings trying to figure out how to move forward, and I want to make sure I understand all the implications before we make any commitments." "Of course. But Robert, you should know that I've already received direct contact from Technova's technical team. They're starting to understand that this isn't just a documentation problem." "What kind of contact?" "Jennifer Walsh from their technical integration group left me a voicemail yesterday asking to discuss the system access issues they're encountering. I haven't responded yet, but it's clear they're beginning to realize that resolving this situation requires more than just reading through documentation." Robert's exhale was audible over the phone. "Jesus, they're going around us to contact you directly." "It makes sense from their perspective. They've acquired a company whose technical infrastructure is essentially non-functional, and they need to understand why. At some point, they're going to ask hard questions about how this situation developed." After ending the call with Robert, I spent an hour researching typical consulting rates for emergency system recovery work. The numbers were substantially higher than my previous salary, especially for situations involving acquisition crises and potential data security issues. If DataStream and Technova needed my expertise to resolve their self-created problem, they were going to pay market rates for that expertise. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Emma, the office is chaos. Right now. Technova executives flew in from Austin this morning and they're not happy. Brad's been in closed-door meetings since 8 a.m. and he looks like he's about to throw up." I responded, "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I'm scared. The Technova people keep asking me technical questions that I can't answer, and Brad, keeps telling them that everything will be fine once they review the documentation. But Emma, you and I both know that documentation can't teach someone how to manage systems they've never seen before. Lisa was right, and her message reinforced my understanding of how serious the situation had become. Technova hadn't just acquired DataStream's client contracts and intellectual property. They had acquired operational responsibility for systems that processed sensitive business data for dozens of companies. If those systems failed or were compromised because of poor management during the transition, the liability issues alone could destroy both companies. At 11:30, my phone rang with another Austin area code number. This time, I answered immediately, curious to hear directly from Technova's technical team. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Jennifer Walsh from Technova. Thank you for taking my call. I understand you were the senior systems administrator at DataStream until recently? That's correct. How can I help you? Jennifer's voice carried the controlled frustration of a technical professional dealing with problems that shouldn't exist. We're encountering significant challenges with system access during our integration assessment, and we're hoping you can provide some guidance about DataStream's infrastructure architecture. What kind of challenges are you facing? Frankly, we can't get administrative access to any of the critical systems. The documentation we received indicates standard enterprise authentication protocols, but every attempt to access core databases, email servers, or backup systems results in security lockouts that we can't override. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to sound uncooperative, but also not wanting to provide free consulting to solve problems that weren't my fault. DataStream's security architecture is more sophisticated than typical enterprise setups. It was designed specifically to prevent unauthorized access, even by people who might have legitimate business reasons for needing access. We understand that security is important, but we're the new owners of the company. Surely there must be master credentials or override procedures that would allow us to access systems we now own. There are, but those credentials weren't transferred. As part of my termination process, DataStream's management terminated my employment without implementing proper succession procedures for critical system access. The silence on Jennifer's end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had taken on a different quality. Ms. Rodriguez, are you saying that DataStream fired their primary systems administrator without ensuring that anyone else could manage their technical infrastructure? That would be an accurate characterization of what happened. And you're the only person who can restore normal system operations. I'm the person who designed and implemented the security protocols that are currently protecting your systems from unauthorized access. Whether I'm the only person who can resolve the situation depends on how much time and money Technova wants to invest in alternative solutions. Jennifer was quiet again, and I could hear keyboard clicking in the background as she presumably took notes or consulted with colleagues. Ms. Rodriguez, would you be willing to meet with our technical team today to discuss the scope of this issue and potential solutions? I'd be happy to discuss consulting arrangements. My standard rate for emergency system recovery work is $300 per hour, with a minimum 4-hour engagement fee. That's quite a bit higher than typical consulting rates. This isn't a typical consulting situation. Technova has acquired a company whose critical systems are essentially non-functional due to mismanaged personnel transitions. Emergency system recovery in an acquisition context requires specialized expertise that commands premium rates. Jennifer promised to discuss my terms with her team and call back within 2 hours. While I waited, I drafted a formal consulting agreement that outlined specific terms for emergency technical assistance, including liability limitations and intellectual property protections that would prevent Technova from using my work to permanently replace my involvement. The callback came exactly 90 minutes later. Jennifer's voice was more businesslike, but also more respectful than it had been in our first conversation. Ms. Rodriguez, we'd like to engage your services for emergency system recovery assistance. We can accept your hourly rate and minimum engagement terms. How soon could you meet with our team? I can be available this afternoon, but I'll need a signed consulting agreement before I begin any work. I'll also need confirmation that DataStream's management has authorized me to access their systems for integration purposes. We'll handle the DataStream authorization. Can you send over the consulting agreement? I emailed the contract and received a signed copy back within 30 minutes. Technova was clearly motivated to resolve the situation quickly, which suggested that the implications of the system access problems were even more serious than I had initially realized. At 2 p.m., I walked back into the DataStream offices for the first time since Friday afternoon. The atmosphere was completely different from the celebration I had left behind. Instead of excited voices discussing acquisition plans, I heard tense conversations about technical problems and timeline delays. Several people I didn't recognize were clustered around conference tables with laptops and legal pads, presumably Technova personnel trying to understand what they had acquired. Lisa saw me first and immediately walked over with an expression of relief mixed with concern. "Emma, I'm so glad you're here. It's been absolute chaos since this morning. How bad is it?" "Bad. The Technova people have been trying since Saturday to access our core systems, and nothing is working the way they expected. They brought in their own technical team from Austin, but our systems aren't configured like anything they've worked with before." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. DataStream's infrastructure had evolved organically over 6 years to meet specific client needs and security requirements. It wasn't a standard enterprise setup that could be managed using typical corporate IT procedures. Jennifer Walsh appeared at my shoulder, a woman in her mid-40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent years solving complex technical problems. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming in. We've set up a conference room where we can review the technical issues we're facing." The conference room contained 4 Technova technical staff, 2 DataStream executives including Robert, and notably, Brad Mitchell, who looked like he hadn't slept since Friday. Brad avoided eye contact as I entered, focusing intently on papers in front of him that probably didn't contain anything important enough to warrant that level of attention. Jennifer opened the meeting by outlining the technical challenges Technova had encountered during their integration assessment. Every critical system required authentication credentials that weren't documented in any of the materials DataStream had provided. Backup procedures referenced security tokens and certificates that no one could locate. Administrative interfaces displayed error messages that weren't covered in any troubleshooting guides. "The fundamental issue," Jennifer explained, "is that we can't perform basic system administration tasks without access credentials that appear to be uniquely held by Ms. Rodriguez." Robert turned to me with an expression that combined embarrassment and hope. "Emma, what would it take to resolve these access issues and get Technova's team up to speed on managing our systems?" I had been thinking about this question all morning, and I had a clear answer. There are 2 approaches we could take. The first is emergency consulting to unlock systems and provide basic administrative training. That would resolve the immediate crisis, but leave Technova dependent on documentation and external support for ongoing operations. What's the second approach? The second approach recognizes that DataStream's technical infrastructure requires ongoing expertise that can't be easily replaced or outsourced. That would involve bringing me back as a permanent employee with appropriate authority and compensation to ensure long-term system stability. Brad spoke for the first time since I'd entered the room, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "We've already discussed this internally, and we don't think it makes sense to reverse personnel decisions that were made for valid business reasons." I looked at him directly for the first time since Friday afternoon. "Brad, what valid business reasons justified firing the primary systems administrator on the same day you were handing over technical assets to new owners?" "The position was eliminated as part of organizational restructuring to align with Technova's existing capabilities," Jennifer interrupted before I could respond. "Mr. Mitchell, with respect, our assessment over the past 3 days indicates that Technova's existing capabilities are not sufficient to manage DataStream's technical infrastructure without significant additional expertise. The room went quiet as the implications of Jennifer's statement sank in. Technova's technical team was essentially admitting that they couldn't manage the systems they had acquired, which raised fundamental questions about the viability of the entire acquisition. Robert cleared his throat. "Emma, if we were to discuss bringing you back as a permanent employee, what kind of arrangement would you consider?" I had prepared for this question as well. I'd want the title of Director of Technical Operations, with authority over all system architecture and security decisions. Salary would need to reflect the critical nature of the role and the specialized expertise required. I'd also want equity participation that aligns my interests with the company's long-term success. "That's a substantial increase from your previous compensation," Brad objected. "That's appropriate for a substantial increase in responsibility and recognition of the value I bring to the organization. Technova is paying $12 million partly for technical infrastructure that I designed and built. My compensation should reflect my contribution to that asset value." Jennifer looked around the table and spoke carefully. "From Technova's perspective, we need confidence that DataStream's technical operations will be stable and well managed going forward. If Ms. Rodriguez is the person with the expertise to ensure that stability, then appropriate compensation seems like a reasonable investment." The meeting continued for another hour, covering technical details, timeline requirements, and preliminary discussions about employment terms. By the end, it was clear that everyone understood the reality of the situation. Technova needed my expertise to make their acquisition successful, and DataStream needed to retain me to avoid potential liability issues with their clients. Brad left the meeting early, claiming he had other commitments that required his attention. Everyone in the room understood that he was removing himself from negotiations that had made his position untenable. 3 days later, I signed a new employment agreement as Director of Technical Operations for DataStream Analytics, a wholly owned subsidiary of Technova Corporation. My salary had increased by 60%. I received stock options in Technova, and I had formal authority over all technical decisions that affected system security and performance. Lisa was promoted to Senior Systems Administrator, with a substantial raise and the promise of additional training and career development opportunities. The technical integration with Technova proceeded smoothly over the following months, and our client base expanded significantly as we gained access to Technova's larger market presence. Brad Mitchell left DataStream 6 weeks later to pursue other opportunities. I heard through professional networks that he had taken a position with a smaller company in Phoenix, where his operational efficiency expertise would presumably be more appropriately matched to the technical complexity of the environment. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of understanding your own value and being prepared to advocate for appropriate recognition of your contributions. It also reinforced my belief that technical expertise, when combined with strong professional principles, creates leverage that can't be easily dismissed or replaced. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued is simply demonstrating exactly how much value you actually provide. And sometimes the most satisfying revenge is watching people discover the consequences of their own poor decisions. Today, DataStream is one of Technova's most successful subsidiaries, and our technical infrastructure serves as a model for other acquisitions. I still wake up early most mornings, but now it's because I'm excited about the challenges and opportunities ahead, rather than worried about systems that might fail without proper attention. The lesson I'd share with anyone facing similar workplace challenges is simple. Never let someone else define your worth, especially when they don't understand what you actually do. Sometimes walking away from a bad situation creates space for something much better to emerge. 6 months after signing my new contract as Director of Technical Operations, I found myself sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 20th floor of Technova's Austin headquarters, looking out at the Texas Hill Country while participating in a quarterly business review that would have been unimaginable during my original tenure at DataStream. The view alone was worth the career upheaval I'd endured. But the professional transformation that had followed was beyond anything I could have planned or predicted. The meeting included executives from across Technova's portfolio of companies, and I was presenting DataStream's technical integration success story as a model for future acquisitions. Our subsidiary had not only maintained all existing client relationships through the transition, but had expanded our service offerings to include 3 new product lines that leveraged Technova's broader technical capabilities. Revenue had increased by 40%. Client satisfaction scores were at all-time highs, and we had become Technova's fastest-growing division. What made the presentation particularly satisfying was the presence of Dr. Sarah Chen, Technova's Chief Technology Officer, who had specifically requested that I share our integration methodology with other technical leaders in the organization. 6 months earlier, I had been considered expendable by a mid-level operations manager at a regional analytics firm. Now I was advising senior executives at a nationally prominent technology corporation on best practices for technical acquisitions. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brad Mitchell's attempt to eliminate my position had ultimately accelerated my career progression by several years. His miscalculation had forced a crisis that revealed the true value of my expertise, leading to recognition and opportunities that might have taken much longer to achieve through normal career advancement. During the presentation, I outlined the security architecture principles that had made DataStream's systems so resilient, the integration strategies that had enabled seamless expansion of our technical capabilities, and the team development approaches that had allowed us to scale our operations without losing the agility that had made us successful as an independent company. The audience asked thoughtful questions about applying these methods to other acquisitions, and I found myself genuinely excited about the possibility of consulting on similar projects across Technova's portfolio. After the formal presentation concluded, Dr. Chen asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. She was an impressive woman in her early 50s who had built her reputation by successfully managing technical integrations for some of the largest technology acquisitions in recent corporate history. Her interest in my work represented exactly the kind of professional validation I had hoped for when I first started building DataStream's infrastructure. "Emma, I've been reviewing the technical assessments from our DataStream acquisition, and I'm particularly impressed by the security protocols you implemented," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "The multi-layered authentication systems you designed are more sophisticated than what we see at companies 3 times DataStream's size." I thanked her for the recognition, explaining how the security architecture had evolved over years of working with clients in highly regulated industries who demanded absolute data protection. The healthcare and financial services clients we worked with couldn't afford any risk of data breaches, so I designed systems that exceeded industry standards for protection and redundancy. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need as we continue expanding through acquisitions. Most small companies prioritize functionality over security, which creates significant liability issues when we integrate their systems with our infrastructure. Dr. Chen paused and looked out the window for a moment. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of you taking on additional responsibilities beyond DataStream. We're evaluating several potential acquisitions that would benefit from your expertise in secure system design and integration planning." The conversation that followed outlined an opportunity that was even more exciting than my current role. Technova was planning to acquire 3 companies over the next 18 months, each with unique technical challenges that required careful integration planning. Dr. Chen wanted me to lead a new technical acquisitions team that would assess target companies' infrastructures, design integration strategies, and oversee the post-acquisition technical transitions. The role would involve significant travel and interaction with executives at target companies, but it would also position you as one of Technova's key strategic assets for growth initiatives, she explained. "We're looking at a vice president level position with equity participation that reflects the value this function brings to our acquisition success." I listened carefully to the details, asking questions about timeline, team structure, and decision-making authority. The opportunity represented another significant career advancement. but it also meant taking on responsibilities that would require me to prove myself in an entirely new context. Leading technical integrations for multi-million-dollar acquisitions was very different from managing systems for a single company, even a successful one. "I'm definitely interested," I told Dr. Chen. "When would you need a decision about moving into this role?" "We're hoping to have the team in place within the next 3 months. The first acquisition target is a machine learning company in Seattle that has some fascinating technology but questionable infrastructure practices. It would be an excellent project for you to demonstrate the value of your approach to technical due diligence." After the meeting with Dr. Chen, I had dinner with Jennifer Walsh, who had become both a professional colleague and a personal friend during the months since our crisis-driven introduction. Jennifer's technical integration work had been essential to DataStream's successful transition, and her willingness to acknowledge the severity of the initial system access problems had helped ensure that the real issues were addressed rather than minimized. "So, you're going to become Technova's acquisition specialist?" Jennifer asked as we shared appetizers at a restaurant in Austin's downtown district. "That's a pretty impressive trajectory from getting fired 6 months ago." I smiled still, somewhat amazed by how dramatically my professional situation had changed. It feels surreal sometimes. In March, I was worried about paying my mortgage. Now I'm being offered a VP position with a technology corporation. "You earned it, though. The work you did to stabilize DataStream's integration and expand our technical capabilities has been noticed at the highest levels of the company." Dr. Chen specifically mentioned your security architecture in the last executive meeting I attended. Jennifer and I had developed a good working relationship during the integration process, partly because she understood the technical complexities involved, and partly because she had been willing to advocate for proper resources and timeline adjustments when challenges arose. Her support had been crucial during some difficult moments when Technova executives questioned whether the integration was proceeding as efficiently as they had expected. "What happened to Brad anyway?" Jennifer asked. "I know he left DataStream, but I never heard the full story about how that played out." I had heard bits and pieces of information about Brad's departure through professional networks and former colleagues, but I had deliberately avoided seeking out details about his post-DataStream career. The satisfaction of watching his poor judgment create consequences for himself had been complete when he left the company, and I hadn't felt any need to track his subsequent struggles. "From what I understand, he took a position with a smaller company in Phoenix, but it didn't work out well," I told Jennifer. Lisa mentioned that he had listed Robert as a reference, but when potential employers called for verification, Robert was diplomatically honest about the circumstances of Brad's departure. Meaning he explained that Brad had nearly destroyed a $12 million acquisition by firing critical technical personnel without proper transition planning. Something like that. Apparently, Robert felt obligated to ensure that other companies understood Brad's decision-making patterns, especially regarding technical operations he didn't understand. The conversation reminded me how important reputation and references are in professional settings, particularly for people in management roles. Brad's attempt to advance his career by eliminating what he saw as unnecessary technical staff had, instead, created a situation that would follow him for years. Future employers would inevitably ask about his role in the DataStream acquisition crisis, and the answers would not reflect well on his judgment or competence. After dinner, I walked around downtown Austin for an hour, thinking about the career path that had brought me to this point. The city was vibrant and energetic, full of technology companies and ambitious professionals who were building interesting solutions to complex problems. It was exactly the kind of environment where I could imagine continuing to grow professionally and take on increasingly challenging projects. The next morning, I flew back to Denver and spent the weekend considering Dr. Chen's offer. The VP role would require relocating to Austin and taking on responsibilities that were much broader than anything I had done before. But it would also represent the kind of career opportunity that most technical professionals only dream about having. I called Michael to discuss the decision, knowing that he would help me think through both the opportunities and the risks involved. As a corporate attorney who had watched my career progression over the years, he understood better than most people how significant this offer was. Emma, 2 years ago, you were worried about job security at a regional analytics firm. Now you're being offered a vice president position at a major technology corporation. That's not just career advancement. That's a complete transformation of your professional trajectory. I know, but it's also intimidating. Leading technical integrations for major acquisitions is very different from managing systems for one company. What if I'm not ready for that level of responsibility? Michael was quiet for a moment, and I could imagine him organizing his thoughts in the methodical way he approached complex legal problems. The fact that you're asking that question suggests you're exactly the right person for the role. The people who get into trouble in executive positions are usually the ones who assume they're ready for anything without thinking carefully about the challenges involved. But what if I fail? What if I take on this role and discover I'm not capable of handling the complexity? Then you'll learn from the experience and find a different path forward. But Emma, you've already demonstrated that you can handle crisis situations, build complex technical systems, and work effectively with senior executives under pressure. Those are exactly the skills that Dr. Chen is looking for. Michael's perspective helped me recognize that my concerns about the new role were largely based on imposing limitations on myself rather than realistic assessments of my capabilities. The technical integration work I had done for DataStream had required many of the same skills that would be needed for acquisition consulting, just applied to a broader range of companies and situations. On Monday morning, I called Dr. Chen to accept her offer. The conversation included detailed discussions about timeline, compensation, team structure, and the specific projects I would be working on during my first year in the role. The financial terms were generous enough that I would be able to buy a house in Austin and still maintain my Denver property as a rental investment. I'm excited to have you join the team, Dr. Chen said as we concluded the call. The machine learning company acquisition I mentioned is moving forward faster than we initially expected, so you'll have an opportunity to demonstrate your approach to technical due diligence almost immediately. The following weeks involved intensive preparation for my transition to Technova's corporate headquarters. I worked with Lisa to document DataStream's operational procedures and train her on the advanced system management techniques she would need to maintain our infrastructure independently. Her promotion to senior systems administrator had been well-deserved, and I was confident that she would continue the tradition of excellent technical operations that had made DataStream attractive to Technova. Robert was supportive of my move to the corporate role, recognizing that it represented a significant opportunity for career advancement, while also ensuring that DataStream would continue to benefit from Technova's broader technical resources. "You've transformed this company twice now," he told me during my final week in Denver. "First, when you rebuilt our infrastructure, and again when you managed the acquisition integration. I'm proud to have been part of your career development." The sentiment was gratifying, particularly coming from someone who had built DataStream from nothing and understood the dedication required to create something valuable in the competitive technology consulting market. Robert's acknowledgement of my contributions felt like validation of the years I had spent learning, building, and solving problems that other people couldn't handle. My last day at the DataStream office was emotional in ways I hadn't expected. The building had been my professional home for 6 years, and walking through the hallways one final time brought back memories of late-night debugging sessions, successful project completions, and the gradual transformation of a struggling company into a valuable acquisition target. Lisa organized a farewell gathering that included current staff, former colleagues who had moved on to other companies, and even a few clients who had become friends over years of working together. The event reinforced my appreciation for the professional relationships I had built and the collaborative culture that had made DataStream a place where people genuinely enjoyed working. "You're leaving us in good hands," I told Lisa as the gathering was winding down. But don't hesitate to call if you encounter technical challenges that require additional expertise. Technova wants DataStream to continue succeeding, and that means supporting you with whatever resources you need. I will, she promised. And Emma, thank you for everything you taught me. Working with you has been the best part of my career, so far. 3 weeks later, I was settling into my new office in Austin and beginning my first technical due diligence project for Technova's acquisition pipeline. The machine learning company in Seattle turned out to have even more significant infrastructure problems than initial assessments had indicated. But the underlying technology was valuable enough that a properly managed integration could create substantial value for Technova's clients. The project required me to work directly with the target company's founding team, Technova's corporate development executives, and external legal and financial advisors who were evaluating different aspects of the potential acquisition. The complexity of coordinating technical assessments with business strategy discussions was challenging, but it was also exactly the kind of work that allowed me to use all the skills I had developed over years of solving complex problems. 6 months into my role as Vice President of Technical Acquisitions, I had overseen the successful completion of 2 major integrations and was leading due diligence for a third potential acquisition that could become Technova's largest deal of the year. The work was demanding and required constant travel, but it was also deeply satisfying to help identify and develop technical assets that could create value for thousands of clients across multiple industries. More importantly, I had found a professional environment where technical expertise was genuinely valued and where career advancement was based on contributions rather than politics. The contrast with my experience at DataStream under Brad's management was striking, and it reinforced my understanding of how much workplace culture affects both individual success and organizational effectiveness. During a recent visit to Denver, to check on DataStream's continued operations, I had coffee with Lisa and learned that the company was thriving under Technova's ownership. Client relationships were stronger than ever, technical capabilities had expanded significantly, and the team had grown by 40% to handle increased demand for their services. It's amazing how much things have changed since the acquisition crisis, Lisa reflected. Sometimes I think about how different everything would be if Brad hadn't made such a catastrophic mistake. I agreed, but I also recognized that the crisis had created opportunities that might not have emerged through normal career progression. Sometimes the worst professional setbacks create space for the best professional breakthroughs, I told her. Getting fired was devastating at the time, but it forced me to recognize my own value and advocate for appropriate recognition of my contributions. The lesson I had learned from the entire experience was that technical expertise, when combined with professional confidence and strategic thinking, creates opportunities that can't be limited by other people's poor judgment. Brad's attempt to marginalize my contributions had ultimately accelerated my career advancement by forcing a crisis that revealed exactly how valuable those contributions actually were. Today, as I prepare for another acquisition assessment meeting with potential target companies, I'm grateful for the professional journey that brought me to this point. The work is challenging, the opportunities for impact are significant, and the financial rewards reflect the value I bring to Technova's strategic objectives. The best revenge, I've discovered, isn't watching someone else fail. It's building something so successful that their failure becomes irrelevant to your own trajectory. Sometimes the people who try to limit your potential end up proving exactly how unlimited that potential actually is. 2 years had passed since I first walked into Technova's Austin headquarters as their new Vice President of Technical Acquisitions, and the transformation in both my professional life and personal perspective had been more profound than I could have imagined when I was sitting in that parking garage with a cardboard box of personal belongings. The woman who had been devastated by an unexpected termination had evolved into someone who thrived on the complexity and high-stakes nature of corporate acquisitions, and the journey between those 2 points had taught me lessons about resilience, value, and strategic thinking that no business school could have provided. My office on the 22nd floor overlooked downtown Austin's rapidly expanding technology corridor, and on clear mornings, I could see the construction cranes that marked the city's transformation into one of America's premier tech hubs. The view served as a daily reminder that growth often requires disruption, and that what initially appears to be destruction can actually be the foundation for something much more substantial and valuable. The acquisition pipeline I managed had expanded to include potential deals worth over $200 million, spanning industries from artificial intelligence to renewable energy to biotechnology. Each project required me to quickly understand complex technical architectures, identify integration challenges and opportunities, and work with diverse teams of executives, engineers, and financial analysts to structure deals that created value for all stakeholders involved. The work was intellectually demanding in ways that pushed me to constantly expand my expertise beyond traditional systems administration into areas like machine learning infrastructure, blockchain security, quantum computing applications, and advanced manufacturing automation. Every new acquisition target represented a learning opportunity that added to my technical knowledge base and enhanced my ability to evaluate future opportunities. But perhaps the most significant change had been in my understanding of how technical expertise translates into business value and strategic influence. During my years at DataStream, I had focused primarily on building and maintaining systems that supported business operations. In my current role, I was using technical knowledge to evaluate entire companies, identify strategic opportunities, and influence investment decisions that shaped Technova's long-term direction. The responsibilities had grown beyond acquisition, evaluation to include post-integration optimization, where I worked with newly acquired companies to enhance their technical capabilities and align their operations with Technova's broader strategic objectives. This work often involved restructuring technical teams, implementing new security protocols, and designing system architectures that could scale to support much larger client bases. One particularly satisfying aspect of the role was mentoring technical professionals at acquired companies who were navigating the challenges of integration with a larger organization. Having experienced both the uncertainty of workplace disruption and the opportunities that could emerge from strategic career moves, I was able to provide guidance that helped talented people maximize the benefits of joining Technova's expanding ecosystem. The financial rewards of my position had exceeded even my most optimistic expectations when I first accepted Dr. Chen's offer. My base salary had increased substantially during annual reviews. My equity position in Technova had appreciated significantly as the company's valuation continued growing, and I received performance bonuses tied to the success of acquisitions I had evaluated and integrated. The combined compensation package had allowed me to purchase a house in Austin's Hill Country, maintain my Denver property as a rental investment, and build a financial foundation that provided genuine security and independence. More importantly, the professional recognition I received had opened doors to opportunities I hadn't known existed when I was focused solely on systems administration. I had been invited to speak at technology conferences about best practices for technical due diligence, had served as an advisor to venture capital firms evaluating infrastructure investments, and had been approached by executive recruiters about senior technology roles at other major corporations. The networking that came with my position had introduced me to an entire community of senior technical professionals who were shaping the direction of American technology development. Through these relationships, I had gained perspectives on industry trends, regulatory challenges, and emerging technologies that enhanced my ability to identify promising acquisition targets and evaluate their long-term potential. During a recent industry conference in San Francisco, I had encountered several former colleagues from my Denver technology network, including people who had known me during my years at DataStream. The conversations were illuminating in terms of how dramatically my professional trajectory had changed in what felt like a relatively short period of time. "Emma, I heard you were working for Technova now, but I had no idea you were leading their acquisition strategy," said Mark Thompson, a systems architect I had known since my early days in Denver's tech community. "That's an incredible career." progression from where you were just a few years ago." The comment prompted me to reflect on how my professional identity had evolved since the crisis that had initially seemed like a career disaster. The woman who had been fired for being too expensive and difficult to work with was now responsible for evaluating technical assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars and advising executives on strategic investments that could determine Technova's competitive position for years to come. Sometimes the worst professional setbacks create the conditions for the best professional breakthroughs, I told Mark. Getting fired forced me to really understand my own value and be more strategic about how I positioned my expertise in the marketplace. The conference also provided an opportunity to reconnect with Jennifer Walsh, who had recently been promoted to Senior Vice President of Technical Operations at Technova, and was now one of my closest collaborators on complex acquisition projects. Our working relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to technical excellence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Brad hadn't made such a catastrophic mistake?" Jennifer asked during a break between conference sessions. "Would you have stayed at DataStream for another decade and never discovered your potential for strategic work?" The question was one I had considered many times, particularly during moments when I was working on high-profile projects that challenged me in ways that routine systems administration never could have. I think I would have eventually outgrown the DataStream role, but it might have taken much longer to recognize that technical expertise could be leveraged for strategic influence rather than just operational support. Well, his loss has definitely been Technova's gain. The acquisition integration methodologies you've developed are being studied by other companies as best practices for technical due diligence. Jennifer's comment referred to a comprehensive framework I had created for evaluating technical assets during the acquisition process, including standardized assessment criteria, integration timeline templates, and risk mitigation strategies that had significantly improved Technova's success rate with technology acquisitions. The framework had been shared with other divisions within Technova and had generated interest from external organizations that were facing similar integration challenges. The development of this framework had required me to synthesize lessons learned from dozens of acquisition projects, identify patterns that predicted success or failure in technical integrations, and create systematic approaches that could be applied across different industries and company sizes. The intellectual challenge of creating something genuinely innovative based on practical experience had been deeply satisfying and had further enhanced my reputation within Technova's leadership team. Dr. Chen had recently asked me to present the framework to Technova's board of directors as part of a broader discussion about the company's acquisition strategy and competitive positioning. The presentation would be my first direct interaction with the board, and it represented another significant milestone in my professional development within the organization. The board is particularly interested in understanding how our technical due diligence capabilities compare to what other major technology companies are doing, Dr. Chen had explained during our preparation meeting. "Your framework gives us a competitive advantage in identifying and integrating promising companies, and the board wants to understand how we can leverage that advantage for accelerated growth." The presentation preparation had required me to research acquisition strategies used by technology leaders like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, analyzing publicly available information about their due diligence processes and integration methodologies. The comparative analysis had revealed that Technova's approach was indeed more sophisticated than industry standards, particularly in terms of security assessment and post-integration optimization. What makes our approach distinctive is the emphasis on understanding not just what technical assets a company has, but how those assets can be enhanced and leveraged within a larger organization, I had told Dr. Chen. Most acquisition teams focus on ensuring that existing systems continue functioning after integration. We focus on identifying opportunities to make those systems significantly more valuable through strategic enhancement. The board presentation had gone exceptionally well, with directors asking detailed questions about specific acquisition successes and expressing interest in expanding the technical due diligence team to support more aggressive growth targets. The discussion had concluded with approval for a significant budget increase that would allow me to hire additional senior technical professionals and develop more sophisticated evaluation tools. Following the board meeting, I had received a call from Technova's Chief Executive Officer, David Park, requesting a private meeting to discuss my long-term career objectives and potential opportunities for expanded responsibilities within the organization. The conversation had taken place in his corner office overlooking Austin's downtown district, and it had covered topics that I never could have imagined discussing when I was struggling to maintain job security at a regional analytics firm. Emma, your work over the past 2 years has been instrumental in Technova's expansion strategy, and we're interested in exploring ways to give you even greater influence over our technical direction, David had said, settling into the chair across from his desk. We're considering creating a new executive position that would combine acquisition strategy with broader technology leadership responsibilities. The role he outlined would make me Technova's Chief Technology Strategy Officer, with authority over acquisition evaluation, technology roadmap development, and strategic partnerships with other major technology companies. The position would represent another significant advancement in both responsibility and compensation, and it would position me as one of the key decision-makers shaping Technova's future direction. The technology landscape is changing so rapidly that traditional organizational structures often can't keep pace with the opportunities and challenges we're facing, David had explained. We need senior leadership that can bridge the gap between technical expertise and strategic vision, and your background gives you exactly that combination of skills. The conversation had included discussions about timeline, compensation structure, and the specific initiatives I would lead in the new role. The financial terms were generous enough that I would achieve a level of personal wealth that seemed impossible just a few years earlier, but the professional opportunities were even more exciting than the monetary rewards. I'd want to build a team that includes both technical specialists and business strategists, I had told David. The most successful technology strategies require people who can understand both the technical possibilities and the market realities that determine which possibilities are worth pursuing. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you the right person for this role. When can you give me a decision about moving forward? I had asked for 2 weeks to consider the offer, partly to ensure that I was making a thoughtful decision about such a significant career move, and partly to discuss the opportunity with Michael and other advisors who could help me evaluate the long-term implications. The conversation with Michael had taken place during a weekend visit to Denver, where I had maintained my original house as both an investment property and a connection to the city where my technology career had developed. Walking through the neighborhoods where I had lived during my DataStream years provided perspective on how dramatically my circumstances had changed and how much personal growth had accompanied my professional advancement. Emma, when you called me 3 years ago to tell me you'd been fired, I was worried about your financial stability and career prospects, Michael had said as we sat on the back patio of my Denver house, watching the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains. Now you're being offered a C-suite position at a major corporation. That's not just career recovery, that's career transformation at the highest level. It's surreal sometimes. I keep expecting someone to tell me there's been a mistake, that I'm not really qualified for these kinds of responsibilities. Imposter syndrome is common among high achievers, especially when success comes quickly. But Emma, you've earned every opportunity that's come your way. The technical expertise you've demonstrated, the strategic thinking you've developed, and the leadership capabilities you've shown are exactly what companies like Technova need to navigate an increasingly complex technology landscape. Michael's perspective had helped me recognize that my concerns about the new role were largely psychological rather than practical. The work I had been doing as Vice President of Technical Acquisitions had already required many of the skills that would be needed for broader technology strategy responsibilities, and my track record of success provided evidence that I could handle expanded authority effectively. What's the worst-case scenario if you take the role and it doesn't work out as expected? Michael had asked. I suppose I'd have to find another senior technology position, probably at a different company. But given the experience I've gained and the network I've built, that wouldn't necessarily be a disaster. And what's the best-case scenario if you take the role and it does work out? I'd be in a position to influence technology development at a scale that could affect thousands of companies and millions of people. I'd have the resources to pursue innovations that could solve significant problems and create substantial value. The risk-benefit analysis had made the decision relatively straightforward. The potential downside was manageable, while the potential upside was extraordinary. More importantly, the opportunity aligned with my long-term interest in using technical expertise to solve complex problems and create positive impact at a significant scale. I had called David Park the following Monday to accept his offer, and the announcement of my promotion to Chief Technology Strategy Officer had generated congratulatory messages from colleagues across Technova's organization and from external contacts in the broader technology community. The response had reinforced my understanding of how visible my work had become and how much professional capital I had accumulated through consistent performance and strategic thinking. The transition to my new role had included a comprehensive onboarding process that involved meeting with senior executives across Technova's various divisions, reviewing strategic planning documents that outlined the company's long-term objectives, and beginning development of technology initiatives that would support those objectives over the next 3 to 5 years. One of the most satisfying aspects of the new position was the opportunity to mentor other technical professionals who were navigating their own career development challenges. Through formal mentorship programs and informal networking, I was able to share lessons learned from my own professional journey and help other people recognize opportunities to leverage their technical expertise for strategic influence. The most important thing I learned is that technical competence alone isn't enough for senior-level success. I had told a group of emerging technology leaders during a recent professional development workshop. You also need to understand how technical capabilities translate into business value, and you need to be able to communicate that value to people who don't have technical backgrounds. The workshop had included case studies from my own experience, including the DataStream acquisition crisis that had ultimately accelerated my career progression. The story resonated with participants who had faced their own professional setbacks and were looking for strategies to turn challenges into opportunities. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is being forced to recognize your own value and advocate for appropriate recognition of your contributions, I had explained. Professional setbacks often create space for professional breakthroughs if you're strategic about how you respond to them. As I prepared for my 3rd year in Austin and my 1st year as Chief Technology Strategy Officer, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point and the lessons that had emerged from experiences that initially seemed devastating but ultimately proved transformative. The woman who had been fired for being inconvenient had become someone whose technical expertise and strategic thinking were considered essential to a major corporation's competitive success. The most important lesson I had learned was that technical expertise, when combined with professional confidence and strategic thinking, creates opportunities that transcend traditional career limitations. Brad Mitchell's attempt to eliminate my position had ultimately accelerated my career advancement by forcing a crisis that revealed exactly how valuable my contributions actually were. Today, as I work on technology strategy initiatives that could shape Technova's direction for the next decade, I'm grateful for every experience that contributed to my professional development, including the crisis that initially seemed like a disaster, but ultimately proved to be the catalyst for extraordinary opportunity. Sometimes the people who try to limit your potential end up proving exactly how unlimited that potential actually is. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.